Title: Chuck Schumer tries to silence Pam Bondi, but her response makes him beg for forgiveness. The Senate chamber was buzzing like a beehive in August, everyone talking at once, shuffling papers, tension thick in the air. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Ms. Bondi, your time is up. Please sit down." Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, known for her calm but razor-sharp style, didn't flinch. She simply folded her notes, looked up at Schumer, and smiled. It wasn't the smug smile of someone who'd just won an argument. It was the kind of smile that said, "I'm about to change the tone of this entire room." And she did. Pam had been invited to speak before the Senate on a hot-button issue, one so polarizing that tempers were flaring before she even arrived. She'd prepared facts, statistics, and case studies, but when she walked into the chamber, she realized something: nobody was actually listening to each other. It wasn't about the issue anymore, it was about winning. About shutting the other side down. And Schumer, sitting at the head of the table, seemed more interested in ending her statement than hearing it. "Ms. Bondi," Schumer repeated, tapping his watch. "Your time is..." "Mr. Schumer," she interrupted gently, "I'll stop speaking, but before I do, I want to tell you something you might not expect to hear from me." The room went silent. Pam closed her binder. No more charts, no more political talking points. Instead, she began telling a story from years earlier, about a young boy in Florida whose father had been wrongfully imprisoned. "I didn't just fight his legal battle," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I visited him. I sat in his small, dimly lit cell and listened to his fears. I promised him I'd fight for his freedom, not because it would look good on my resume, but because his little boy deserved to have his dad at his baseball games." She went on to explain how, after months of relentless effort, they proved the man's innocence. The day he was released, his son ran into his arms, sobbing. "And I realized that day," she said, looking directly at Schumer, "our job is not to silence each other, it's to fight for people who don't have a microphone in front of them. People who need us to listen, even when it's inconvenient." Schumer leaned back in his chair, but his expression had changed. The man who had moments ago been determined to cut her off now looked unsettled. Pam's voice wavered slightly as she told the second part of the story, how, years later, that same boy showed up at her office. He was now a young man, wearing a Marine uniform. He had come to thank her for giving him his dad back, when he was just a scared little kid. "You didn't just help my father," he had told her. "You saved my childhood." Pam looked around the Senate chamber. "That's why I'm here. Not to score points, not to win a soundbite, but to remind all of us, Republican, Democrat, Independent, that every decision we make affects real people with real families." A long silence hung in the air. Finally, Schumer cleared his throat. His voice, for the first time that day, was gentle. "Ms. Bondi, I owe you an apology." He didn't just apologize for cutting her off. He admitted that in his rush to stick to procedure, he'd forgotten why they were all there in the first place. And then, perhaps most surprising of all, he asked her to finish her remarks. Pam finished, not with political jabs, but with a plea for unity. "Kindness isn't weakness," she said. "Listening doesn't mean surrendering your values. And compassion might be the only thing that can save us from ourselves." When she left the chamber, there was no shouting. No sarcastic quips, just quiet reflection. Outside, a reporter caught up with her. "Ms. Bondi, how did you manage to change the tone in there?" Pam smiled again, the same knowing smile she'd worn when this all began. "I didn't go in to win an argument," she said. "I went in to win AH. And somewhere in Washington that night, Chuck Schumer, who had started the day determined to silence her, found himself telling his staff, 'I think I just learned something from Pam Bondi.' Because sometimes, the loudest thing you can say, is spoken softly, with compassion." Pam stepped out into the crisp Washington air. The cold wind brushed against her face, carrying with it the faint echo of traffic from Constitution Avenue. She had been in high-pressure rooms before, courtrooms, televised debates, even moments when her career felt like it was on the line. But something about today felt different. Maybe it was because she hadn't gone in there with a win in mind. Maybe it was because, deep down, she had hoped that one story, one genuine reminder of humanity, could cut through the noise. She was about to head to her car when a young intern, no more than 22, came jogging toward her, clutching a folder. "Ms. Bondi, I just wanted to say, thank you." Pam turned, puzzled. "For what?" The young woman's voice trembled. "My brother's in prison. He didn't do what they said. We don't have the money for a lawyer. I've been trying to get people to listen for months." She swallowed hard. "When you told that story about the father and his son, I thought, maybe you'd understand." Pam didn't hesitate. She reached into her bag, pulled out a card, and placed it in the woman's hand. "Call me tomorrow morning," she said softly. "We'll see what we can do." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She mouthed thank you as Pam walked away. Back inside the Senate building, Chuck Schumer lingered in the nearly empty chamber. He sat with his notes in front of him, but for the first time that day, they looked like meaningless scraps of paper. He thought about what Pam had said. He thought about how quick he had been to shut her down, just to keep things on schedule. And then he thought about something he hadn't thought about in years, his own father. His father had been a blue-collar worker in Brooklyn, a man who taught him the value of listening before speaking. Somewhere along the way, in the high-speed world of politics, Chuck realized he had stopped doing that. He stood up, walked to his office, and told his assistant, "Find me the number for Pam Bondi's office." Pam was in her office when the phone rang. "Pam," the voice said, "it's Chuck." "Chuck Schumer?" she asked, a little amused. "Yeah," he chuckled. "I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about what you said. And I'd like to talk, off the record, about how we can bring more of that into the work we do here." Pam leaned back in her chair. She hadn't expected this call, but something told her it was genuine. "All right, Chuck," she said. "But only if you're ready to listen as much as you talk." He laughed again. "Deal." Weeks later, the two of them, unlikely allies, co-sponsored a small bipartisan initiative to provide legal aid to wrongfully accused citizens. It wasn't flashy. It didn't dominate headlines, but it quietly started helping people in ways most Americans would never see on the evening news. And one of the first people to benefit from the program, the brother of that young Senate intern who had chased Pam down outside the building. Months after the hearing, Pam received a handwritten letter. "Ms. Bondi," it read, "I'm writing this from my kitchen table, sitting across from my brother. He's free now, he's home. And it's because you listened when no one else would. You reminded me that not all politics is just politics. Sometimes it's personal, and sometimes it's life-saving. Thank you for giving us our family back." Pam folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, right next to the one she had kept all these years from that young Marine who once thanked her for freeing his father. Because for Pam, those letters weren't just memories, they were proof. Proof that even in the loudest rooms, the quiet voice of compassion can still be heard. And somewhere, Chuck Schumer was still telling his staff the same thing he had said on that very first day. "I think I just learned something from Pam Bondi. If you'd like, I can now polish this entire extended story into a smooth, natural spoken script with pacing pauses, emotional emphasis, and narration cues so it flows like a real 10 to 12 minute audiobook scene. That would make it perfect for your audience."